Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are really pulling back the curtain on something fundamental, something you interact with constantly. Food. But we're not here to debate the latest diet trend or, count macronutrients.
Right, not at all.
Our mission today is to take you inside this high-stakes world, often pretty low on transparency, where corporate goals really collide head-on with public health.
Yeah.
We're tackling this kind of uncomfortable truth that the American food supply, which we often praise, right? Cheap, abundant food, a modern marvel. It's actually driven by a corporate economic agenda.
Fundamentally driven by it. And it's so crucial for you, the listener, to grasp that food isn't just about personal choice. It's become this fiercely political and economic battleground.
Right.
We're diving into sources today that really shine a light on this core paradox. Food companies, well, they have to prioritize maximizing their sales. That's their job.
Best.
And critically, the products with the highest profit margins, they're almost always the highly processed, energy-dense ones, the stuff that's easy to make, ship, and sell in huge volumes.
Yeah, the stuff that lasts forever on the shelf.
Exactly. And that drive for profit, it regularly undermines efforts to promote sound nutrition policy. It just creates this ongoing systemic conflict.
And to really get a sense of this conflict, you need to understand the sheer power, both financial and just logistical, that's concentrated in the hands of, really just a few massive global companies. It's kind of staggering.
It really is.
Let's just start with the snapshot to give you an idea of the power structure we're dealing with. Take a company like JBS, just one company. In 2021 alone, their capacity was, look at this, 76,550 cattle, 127,100 hogs, and an incredible 13.8 million birds processed every single day.
It's almost impossible to even visualize that kind of volume day in, day out. But here's the political and economic context that really matters. JBS, that one company, sold more food globally in 2021 than huge household names like Nestle, PepsiCo, Kraft Heinz, and Unilever combined.
Wow, combined.
Combined.
Yep.
So when you have that level of centralized power, that much economic muscle focused in one place, their agenda doesn't just, try to influence policy. It often dictates it.
It shapes the whole landscape.
Completely. It lets them control supply chains, effectively set prices, deploy enormous economic and political leverage, far beyond what any single government health agency or, frankly, any public interest group could possibly muster.
Yeah.
That's the incredibly unbalanced situation we're navigating. So the question isn't just about what you choose to eat, but who's controlling the system that provides those choices in the first place.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this system. Let's look at the pretty aggressive strategies the industry uses to shape policy, influence research. Our sources describe this as a very proactive effort, not just, competing in the marketplace, but a deliberate campaign.
Yeah.
And the goal seems to be creating this aura of scientific confusion for you, the consumer.
That phrase captures it perfectly.
And it all starts with just overwhelming financial firepower.
Right, absolutely. It's essentially a war waged with marketing dollars, and frankly, public health initiatives are just hopelessly outgunned. It's not even a fair fight.
How bad is the disparity?
Well, think about this. The advertising budget for just one single nationally distributed food product, maybe a new sugary cereal or a candy bar or a soda.
Right.
That one product's ad spend often blows past the entire federal budget dedicated to promoting healthy eating, like, say, educating people about the old food pyramid by maybe 10, 20, even 50 times.
50 times.
Yeah.
For one product. That's actually unbelievable.
It is.
You're talking about the public health message being completely, utterly drowned out.
Completely.
So if the government manages to scrape together $1 to suggest you eat more vegetables, the industry is right there spending $50 telling your kids that some brightly colored, sugar-packed alternative is the fun, cool thing to buy.
Exactly. And what makes it worse, as our sources point out, is that a lot of the federal spending on nutrition education isn't even that effective at reaching the general public anyway.
How so?
Well, the USDA, for example, they spend hundreds of millions each year on various nutrition programs. But instead of big, visible campaigns that everyone sees, most of that money gets channeled into specialized research projects or administrative stuff, activities that really only target a pretty small number of people.
So it's fragmented.
Very fragmented.
Okay.
Lots of small grants, diffuse efforts. It stands zero chance against a multi-billion-dollar, highly coordinated, centralized marketing blitz from the industry.
And the industry's marketing, it's not fragmented at all, is it? It's described as more like a laser.
Precisely. A surgical instrument. They're successful campaigns, they're meticulously researched, they know their audience, they repeat the message constantly, relentlessly, and critically, they target specific groups, including children, very effectively, all to drive sales of specific commodities.
Not promoting health behaviors, but specific products.
Exactly. Milk, cheese, orange juice, processed snacks, they're building brand loyalty and consumption habits, often starting from a very young age.
And they figured out the magic words, too. Health claims.
Oh, absolutely. They know exactly what language works. You slap a low-fat or high-fiber or added calcium claim on the box, sales go up. It's measurable.
Almost instantly, I bet.
Pretty much. But the real jackpot is when they can use those really high-value health claims, the ones that sound almost medicinal, lowers cholesterol, helps prevent cancer.
Right.
Because that perceived health benefit makes you, the shopper, often ignore the product's overall nutritional value or lack thereof and just focus on that one positive claim, straight into the shopping cart.
It's a brilliant, if cynical, game of misdirection. And our sources also point to a slightly darker historical angle here. They note that food advertisers owned by cigarette companies.
Ah, yes.
The masters.
Right. They were apparently experts at manipulating public perception, using philanthropy and charity to sell, toxic products back in the day, and they applied those same skills to food.
They were particularly adept, the sources say, at using charitable causes to sell food products. It blurs the line, doesn't it, between genuine corporate goodwill and very calculated product placement aimed at building brand loyalty, especially within communities that might be more vulnerable or trusting.
So the strategic use of claims, the marketing muscle, the PR, it leads us straight to the regulatory battlefield. Specifically, the fight over actually allowing these health claims on food labels in the first place.
Exactly. And this is where you really see the industry's influence on government agencies.
Yeah.
Historically, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, was supposed to be the gatekeeper. They're a science-based agency focused on safety, efficacy. Does this stuff actually work? Right, a scientific standard.
But the dietary supplement industry in particular mounted this immense coordinated pressure campaign against the FDA. And they were incredibly successful. They essentially forced the FDA over time to move towards the much looser, less scientifically demanding approach used by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission.
And the FTC's main job is just preventing false advertising, right? Not proving scientific validity.
Precisely. Their standard is basically, is the claim false or misleading? It's not. Is there robust, conclusive scientific evidence that this product does what it claims? So we saw this shift away from needing rigorous proof that something works towards just needing to show that the claim isn't an outright lie.
That's a huge difference.
It's massive. And this legal pressure really got cemented by a couple of landmark court cases involving the supplement industry. You might have heard of them. Pearson v. Shalala and then Pearson II.
What happened there?
Well, the industry basically sued the FDA and won. They forced the agency to permit certain health claims on supplements, even when the scientific consensus wasn't totally locked down yet. The example often cited is the claim that folic acid could reduce the risk of vascular disease.
So the courts overruled the FDA's scientific judgment.
In a way, yes. What's really fascinating and sort of crucial for you to understand is the legal thinking behind it. The courts essentially said, look, if a claim isn't inherently misleading, meaning, totally baseless, then the balance tips towards allowing the claim, maybe with a disclaimer, rather than suppressing it completely. First Amendment commercial speech rights sort of won out.
The tiny asterisk disclaimer.
The tiny asterisk disclaimer, exactly, which most people probably ignore. But legally, it allows the claim, and this creates a seismic shift in the burden of proof. Suddenly, the company doesn't have to definitively prove to the FDA's rigorous standards that their claim is true. Instead, the FDA has the much harder job of proving the claim is inherently misleading or fraudulent.
Which is a much higher bar for the regulators.
Much higher. If there's any shred of scientific evidence, even if it's preliminary or contested, the claim can often squeak through as long as they add that little disclaimer. It effectively puts commercial speech and, market freedom ahead of the precautionary principle in public health.
And this blurring of the lines, it didn't stay confined to the supplement aisle, did it?
Not at all. The food industry saw the opening immediately. Industry representatives started openly arguing that the distinction between dietary supplements and conventional foods was, basically evaporating.
How so?
They started saying things like, botanicals, plant extracts often used in supplements, maybe they shouldn't just be considered food additives, which fall under the FDA's stricter rules. They wanted to bring that supplement-style claim-making right into the main grocery aisles, onto everyday foods and drinks.
And the big companies jumped right in.
Oh, absolutely. This wasn't just small vitamin companies anymore. Big Food saw the opportunity. You had giants like Procter & Gamble teaming up with Coca-Cola, for instance, to create a functional beverage.
What was in it?
Glucosamine. That compound lots of people take hoping it'll help with arthritis symptoms. So suddenly you've got Coke selling a drink positioned almost like a joint health product. It's blurring food and medicine.
And then there's Pepsi.
Ah, yes, Pepsi. They got noted for advertising one of their new drinks, probably some low-calorie thing, with the incredibly cheeky tagline, liquid liposuction.
Wow, okay.
I mean, it perfectly illustrates the kind of aggressive, boundary-pushing marketing the FDA was up against. The goal was always to link their product, no matter how tenuous the connection, to some kind of health improvement, not just basic nutrition. Make it sound beneficial.
So when you're pushing the envelope like that, you have to expect some pushback, right?
Yeah.
From regulators, maybe public health officials.
Definitely. Which brings us to how the industry reacts when someone does dare to criticize them publicly. And it's not always just, quiet lobbying behind the scenes. Sometimes it's overt, aggressive, legal action designed to intimidate.
To make an example of them.
Precisely. Our sources highlight this really chilling specific case. A Texas state official dared to publicly object to some of the health claims being made on a Kellogg cereal box.
Okay, so what did Kellogg do? Send a letter?
No, they didn't just issue a press release refuting it. They sued the official, personally, for slander.
Sued the public official?
Yes, and they released this incredibly forceful, frankly threatening statement. I think I have the quote here.
Yeah.
It has taken 85 years to build one of the best corporations in the world, and we will not allow an arrogant, irresponsible public official to attack our reputation.
Whoa, that's sending a message.
Crystal clear.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about winning that specific lawsuit. It was a shot across the bow to every single health official, every state regulator, every politician across the country. If you criticize us publicly, if you challenge our claims or reputation, expect massive legal and financial retaliation.
Using their economic power to silence critics.
Deliberately. It's about maintaining the status quo and keeping that profitable system running smoothly without inconvenient questions about public health.
So that pattern of influence, market power, legal tactics, sometimes outright intimidation. It's not just aimed at you, the consumer, through ads. It's about capturing legislative power, shaping the very structure of government advice itself.
Exactly.
Let's shift focus now to who actually gets to control the official national nutritional advice. Things like the food pyramid, stuff that really should be purely about health. But historically, it's been intensely political.
Oh, deeply political. This whole bureaucratic fight over who owns dietary guidelines really exploded back in the mid-1970s.
What was the trigger?
Well, it followed the huge controversy around the very first set of dietary goals in 1977. That was when the government first officially suggested Americans should maybe eat less fat, caused a huge uproar from the meat and dairy industries.
I can imagine.
So in the wake of that, Congress was feeling a lot of pressure to do something about health promotion, but their main motivation wasn't purely health. It was largely pragmatic. They were trying to figure out ways to reduce the nation's rapidly growing healthcare costs.
Okay, so health promotion becomes a political goal. But then who gets to do it?
And that's where the massive turf war erupted. You had officials at the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, whose core mission, let's be honest, is promoting agriculture, supporting farmers, boosting commodity sales.
Right, selling more corn, beef, milk.
Exactly. They were battling fiercely against officials at DHEW, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which was the forerunner of today's Health and Human Services Department. And DHEW's mandate was supposed to be health and welfare protection.
So a fundamental conflict in their missions.
Absolutely. Selling more stuff versus preventing disease. They competed hammer and tongs for control over who would run nutrition education programs and who would get the research funding.
How did that get resolved? It sounds like a deadlock.
It probably would have been, but a key political figure stepped in. Senator Hubert Humphrey, a Democrat from Minnesota, a major agricultural state, mind you, basically settled the argument.
What did he say?
He apparently intervened pretty bluntly. He stated that DHEW, the health department, has avoided the area of prevention like the plague, and it's about time that USDA moves in.
Wow. So he basically handed it to the agriculture department.
He did, and that political intervention got formalized. The 1977 Farm Bill Public Law, 95-113 if you want the specifics, officially gave the USDA the primary responsibility for issuing dietary advice to the American public.
Okay, pause there.
Yeah.
Think about the huge conflict of interest that creates. The very agency whose job is to promote the sales of agricultural products
Beef, dairy, corn, wheat, sugar.
is now also the agency tasked with telling people how to eat healthily, which often means telling them to eat less of those exact same products.
It's a fundamental structural conflict baked right into the system. And if you look at the history since then, the original food pyramid, the subsequent My Plate guidelines, you can see the fingerprints of that conflict all over them. Well, the agency writing the policy, the USDA, has this inherent economic incentive to, let's say, not be too critical of the commodities it's supposed to promote. This influenced that famous push towards a low-fat diet back in the 80s and 90s.
Right, the fat is evil era.
Which ultimately led to the advice, basically, to replace fats with more carbohydrates. Lots and lots of grains, pastas, breads at the base of the pyramid.
And now looking back, there's a lot of scientific debate, even regret, about that advice, isn't there?
There is. A substantial and growing body of evidence, plus a lot of historical reflection, suggests that advice, which, let's be clear, was heavily influenced by policy drivers wanting to support the powerful grain and sugar industries while demonizing fat, might have been seriously misguided.
How so?
While the low-fat message often translated into people eating more high-sugar, highly processed, low-satiety carbs. Think fat-free cookies packed with sugar. And many argue this inadvertently fueled the later epidemics of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and other chronic diseases.
So the policy maybe helped certain agricultural sectors, but didn't necessarily lead to optimal public health.
That's the argument. And it highlights how, when you look at the food system from the supply side, it's still mostly about production efficiency, not human nutritional needs. We operate within a global system designed to produce food to sell, often in surplus, not necessarily food to optimize health.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Look at protein. In pretty much all high-income countries, the daily protein supply available per person is consistently around 100 to 110 grams a day.
Said a lot.
It's often nearly double what a typical person actually needs for basic health, unless maybe you're a serious athlete or bodybuilder. The system is just engineered for maximum output, maximum sales, maximum revenue, not optimal nutrition, and that leads to huge amounts of waste, but also overconsumption.
Okay, and this drive to sell, sell, sell. It inevitably leads to another critical battleground for corporate interests. Schools, capturing those young appetites.
Absolutely. The food industry understood very early on. If you get kids hooked on your products, create those habits early, you potentially have loyal, paying customers for life.
And the problem of what they call competitive foods in schools, it started quite early, didn't it?
Surprisingly early. By the late 1960s, long before people were really focused on childhood obesity, those coin-operated vending machines selling sodas, candy, chips, highly profitable, unhealthy stuff were already firmly established in many schools.
And they were directly competing with the school lunch programs.
Directly, often undermining the federally subsidized, more balanced meal programs, competing for the kids' limited pocket money, and, maybe more importantly, competing for their appetites right before or after lunch. If a kid fills up on chips and soda, they're less likely to eat the healthier lunch.
So Congress tried to step in.
They did, sort of. In 1970, they passed amendments allowing the USDA, remember, they're in charge now, to block the sale of these competitive foods, but only during the official lunch period and only in the cafeteria food service area.
That sounds specific.
It may be not very effective.
Exactly. It sounds like a decent intervention on the surface, but the industry is absolutely brilliant at finding and exploiting loopholes, regulatory cracks.
So what was the loophole here?
It was beautifully arcane. The regulation was written very narrowly. It stated that any food item that had ever been served as part of an official school lunch reimbursement program, think of like a piece of cake or maybe a sugary cookie that technically met some nutrient standard back in the day. Well, those items could still be sold on cafeteria snack lines, even outside the designated lunch serving time.
You're kidding. So junk food that had once technically been part of a meal was exempt.
Essentially, yes. And this created a massive loophole. It meant that lots of popular, highly processed snacks and candies could still be sold freely in other parts of the school or at other times of the day. It guaranteed that profitable competition against the healthier meals the government was supposedly trying to promote could just continue. Wow. That's a classic case of a regulation being written just narrowly enough to preserve the industry's interest, isn't it?
Textbook example. The school system, this guaranteed captive audience of young consumers, was kept profitable for the snack and soda companies, even while everyone was sort of pretending to promote health through the subsidized meals. The system allowed the competition to thrive. Now, this conflict we've been talking about, corporate profit undermining public health, it feels very current, right, with obesity, diabetes.
Yeah, very much so.
But it's crucial to understand this is not new. It's deeply rooted in history. We can find clear precedents going way, way back to the early days of food safety crusades in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Back when the fight wasn't even about long-term chronic disease, but just not getting immediately poisoned by your food.
Exactly. Preventing acute sickness, sometimes death. Look at the late 1800s. You find these horrifying terms in historical accounts like embalmed beef and embalmed milk.
Embalmed, like with formaldehyde.
Sometimes, yes, or other dangerous chemicals. These adulterated products were causing widespread illness, even fatalities. In states like Ohio, Indiana, Nebraska, it was a serious public health crisis.
And this wasn't accidental contamination, was it? It was deliberate.
Often deliberate, yes. Driven by profit. Commercial butchers, for example, discovered that salicylic acid, a chemical relative of aspirin, actually could make graying, aging beef look pink and fresh again.
Wow. How did it work?
It was a chemical reaction that basically masked the signs of spoilage, made the old meat look newly butchered for about 12 hours or so.
Just long enough.
Just long enough to get it out of the shop and into the customer's kitchen before they realized they'd bought meat that was actually starting to go bad. It was pure deception, using chemistry to stretch shelf life and profits, directly risking consumer safety.
So this kind of Wild West environment is what led to people like Dr. Harvey Wiley.
Precisely. Dr. Wiley was the chief chemist at the Department of Agriculture, a real pioneer, and he launched his famous, or maybe infamous, chemical trials known as the Poison Squad.
The Poison Squad. What was that?
His goal was actually purely scientific. He wanted to rigorously test common food additives and preservatives on healthy human volunteers, young men who worked at the department, to see what effects they had and establish safe levels, if any.
Sounds reasonable. Did it work?
Well, it got complicated fast. Even his carefully controlled experiments were kind of immediately subverted.
Yeah.
Not by industry interference this time, but by the volunteers themselves.
Wow.
The plan was to secretly add the test chemical borax, was one of the main ones, commonly used as a preservative then into the men's food. They weren't supposed to know which meals contained it.
A blinded study.
Right. But the volunteers, who were mostly educated clerks and scientists themselves, they were smart. They quickly figured it out. Maybe someone in the kitchen tipped them off, or maybe they could just taste it.
So what did they do?
They realized the borax was being hidden in the butter. So collectively, they just stopped eating the butter without being told. So Wiley, frustrated, then tried dosing their milk with borax. And they figured that out too. Complained the milk or coffee tasted off chemically.
Must have driven him crazy as a scientist trying to get clean data.
Immensely frustrating, I imagine. Eventually, he just gave up trying to hide it and started serving the borax openly in capsules alongside the meals. This actually led to the press, including the Washington Post, giving him the sarcastic nickname Old Borax.
Ouch. Old borax.
Yeah. But despite the difficulty and the public mockery, Wiley's scientific conclusion and his public stance remained absolutely firm. He argued vehemently for strong government action against the widespread use of borax in everyday food.
Did he think it should be banned entirely?
He felt its use should be reserved only for extremely limited, very specific, special purposes. And he was clear what he meant. Like preserving food for long, isolated journeys, say an Arctic expedition to the North Pole where there were literally no other options.
But not for the general food supply.
Absolutely not. He argued the day-to-day food supply needed total protection from that kind of chemical adulteration for the sake of basic public health.
But even when public outrage really boiled over, say, after Upton Sinclair published The Jungle with its horrific descriptions of the meatpacking industry.
A huge moment. Public disgust was intense.
Even then, the power of the big meatpackers, the Beef Trust, and their PR skills allowed them to kind of water down any real reforms, right?
Absolutely. That power was immense and incredibly persistent. It lasted for generations. Our sources mention that even as recently as the 1990s, independent ranchers were still genuinely terrified of testifying against the giant meatpacking companies like IBP, which is now part of Tyson.
Why? What were they afraid of?
Retaliation, pure economic ruin. There's an account from a cattleman named Mike Callicrate. He claimed that right after he testified publicly, criticizing the Packers' practices, they simply stopped bidding on his cattle. Just cut him off. He said, "I couldn't sell my cattle." In a market dominated by just a few huge buyers, speaking out could literally destroy your livelihood overnight. That's market power used as a weapon.
And we see the blueprint for that kind of response way back in 1906 after the jungle hit.
Exactly. The Beef Trust didn't respond with immediate comprehensive reform. Their first move was to launch a massive public relations campaign. The goal was to vilify Sinclair and other critics, paint them as radicals or liars, and simultaneously whitewash their own operations.
What kind of things did they say?
Executives gave interviews claiming their meat was handled as carefully and circumspectly as they are in the average home kitchen, which, given what Sinclair described, was just laughable.
A complete denial.
And in a really cynical move that we still see today, they shifted the blame. Executives argued that any sanitary problems weren't due to company policy or cutting corners to boost profits, but were solely the fault of the workers.
Blame the workers.
Yep. They blamed the greed and laziness of the immigrant slaughterhouse workers. One executive famously contended, "Men are men, and it is pretty hard to control some of them." It was a classic tactic. Deflect systemic responsibility onto the lowest paid, least powerful individuals in the chain.
So in the end, Congress did pass the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. That was a victory, wasn't it?
It was a victory, yes, but a compromised one. The sources describe it as a significantly watered-down version of the tougher reforms that people like Dr. Wiley were pushing for.
And here's the kicker, right?
Yeah.
Who paid for it?
And this is the most telling detail, the perfect encapsulation of the whole pattern we've been discussing today. The act mandated federal inspection, yes, but it required the taxpayers to foot the bill for that inspection, not the multi-million-dollar meatpacking industry whose practices necessitated the regulation in the first place.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
The industry causes the problem, demands deregulation, fights reform, and then makes the public pay for the cleanup.
That is the consistent historical pattern laid bare. Whether it's tainted meat in 1906 or misleading health claims on cereal today, the industry playbook is remarkably similar. They fight regulation, they manufacture doubt, and they successfully ensure that the costs and consequences of their profit-driven activities fall elsewhere onto you, the taxpayer, or onto the long-term health of the public. They privatize the profits, always, while socializing the risks and the cleanup costs.
You know, listening to all this, what really stands out is just how consistent that historical pattern is. It really stretches across a century or more of food politics.
It's undeniable.
Whether you're looking at those early battles against dangerous chemical adulteration or the modern fights over, health claims on labels, sugary drink taxes, dietary guidelines, the powerful food industry interests, time and again, prioritize maximizing their profit and their market share.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to consistently come at the expense of public health, transparency, and often just basic long-term well-being.
It really forces you to confront the reality that this isn't just about individual choices or, bad companies. It's fundamentally a systemic issue. It's rooted in our legislative structures, our economic incentives,
Right.
Your food choices, the ones you make every day. They are completely inextricably linked to the system of corporate influence. And hopefully this deep dive makes it really clear that while changing your own diet, making healthier personal choices, that's vital, absolutely necessary for your own health. But it's not enough to change the whole game. Policy advocacy, pushing for systemic change, is just as crucial if we ever want to reshape the food environment itself, make the healthy choice the easy choice for everyone.
So you can choose a healthier plate for yourself, but you also need to advocate for a healthier system for everyone.
Beautifully put, yes.
Because if this huge industrial food system is seemingly determined to, homogenize what we eat, maybe flatten the cultural richness of food, and definitely keep us confused with all this conflicting messaging and scientific doubt, then just understanding the political nature of what's on your plate, that feels like the essential first step towards maybe reclaiming some autonomy, doesn't it?
It absolutely is. And that leads us to a final thought for you to maybe chew on, something provocative that connects that immense centralization of power we saw with JBS right back to your own kitchen table.
Okay.
Our sort of mainstream ideology, it tends to equate high technology, big agriculture, measurable economic growth. It equates all that with progress, with a capital P.
Bigger is better. More efficient.
Exactly. But as we've seen throughout this discussion, that centralized corporate power often works to conceal a kind of systemic harm, maybe even violence. It does this through these frankly, implausible narratives about trade always being a win-win, enriching everyone equally,
When in reality,
when in reality it often looks more like a centralized resource extraction system designed to enrich a relatively small number of powerful global players, often at the expense of local economies, environments, and public health.
so faced with that overwhelming centralization, that consolidation of power, what's the counter move?
Well, maybe the most relevant form of political resistance available to you as an individual or community is actually increasing your personal autonomy. How might you do that?
No.
Perhaps by consciously focusing on more decentralized food solutions, supporting local farmers, farmers markets, community-supported agriculture, maybe investing in your local food economy, or even exploring ways towards more self-provisioning, like gardening, preserving, things that directly challenge that centralized model.
Taking back some control.
Taking back control. And maybe most fundamentally, by doing exactly what you've done today, obtaining knowledge, quickly but thoroughly, equipping yourself to see past that deliberately created aura of scientific confusion that the industry works so hard to maintain.
So knowledge itself is a form of resistance here.
Absolutely. We really encourage you to keep asking those tough questions. Where does your food really come from? Who benefits from the current system? And who ultimately gets to set the rules for what ends up on your plate? Keep digging.
A lot to think about. Thank you for diving deep with us today.